Marriage, you've said, is being deprivileged, that governments are gradually granting all the privileges of the married to the unmarried. You even say that in many cases women are effectively being married to the state.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that the decision to offer subsidies, both in terms of social benefit payments and access to public housing, to women who had children outside wedlock, meant that you created, quite reasonably actually, given what was often the alternative for these young women, a quite large and growing number of women in this country who have no need to get married, and indeed have many good reasons not to do so, because by remaining unmarried, they keep getting these benefits. They don't have to have a potentially abusive and violent male partner in the home, and they can raise children. I don't blame them. One is always accused when one enters this argument of hating unmarried mothers or being against unmarried. I don't blame them in the slightest. They're following a perfectly reasonable personal trajectory in the society in which they live. The desire which almost all women have to have and rear children, the desire to have a home, the desire to have some sort of security is provided for them not by a husband anymore, but by the state. The trouble is this is not, in most cases, a particularly satisfactory arrangement for the children, particularly for boys brought up in households without fathers. Try as these women may to bring these children up well, it's like trying to lift a heavy weight with only one arm. You simply can't do it. However good-hearted you are, as well as you could if you had two. Again, it's not a condemnation of the person. And it's been catastrophic. And all the evidence, all the surveys, all the outcomes show that it's been catastrophic, and yet we persist with it. Yes, they are married to the state. That's what's happened. The state is their provider.
Do you think in the age of civil partnerships and the like, it's ever going to be possible to move marriage back to a place of special privilege in the West?
Well, look, if you asked me honestly about the fate of the society in which I live, I'd say it was finished. I'd say that it's just a matter of time before our civilization crumbles into dust. I don't see any reason whatsoever to hope that it will get any better, and there doesn't seem to be any recognition on the part of the reformers that anything they've done has been mistaken or damaging. So probably not, but I'm not allowed to despair, so I have to hope. I always quote Arthur Hugh Clough, "Say not the struggle naught availeth, the labour and the wounds are vain. The enemy faints not nor faileth, and as things have been, things remain. If hopes were dupes, fears may be liars." And I have to believe that, because otherwise I might as well go and lie down and die, which I don't at the moment plan to do. But my reasoning mind tells me it's all up, that we have actually sabotaged ourselves as a civilization, which seems to be a great shame, because it was quite a good civilization while it lasted.
Because your books don't at all sound despairing. They do sound very strong. They're almost prophetic, I think, but they don't sound despairing.
Well, I can't despair. I'm not permitted to despair. If I were permitted to despair, I would. Reason would lead me there, but it's one of the consolations of religion that I'm simply not allowed to do that. There has to remain some purpose, but maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe one looks back at the great reformers. I don't want to compare myself with any of them, the great Christian reformers of the 18th century, who set out to re-Christianize a country which had become more or less pagan, as far as I can tell. And in their lifetime, they were pelted with mud and derided. And I think probably the effects of what they did weren't truly and completely felt until the middle of the 20th century. So maybe that's what I have to put up with, that I can rail and complain now and call for reform and change now, and no one will pay the slightest attention. But perhaps, if I have any, my great-grandchildren will benefit from it.
Just turn our attention for a few moments to human rights. You've spoken a lot about human rights, and you're not, I suppose, a big fan of the way they're represented in documents like the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. You argue that historically Britain and nations like Britain have used talk about rights to limit the state, whereas now we're doing the opposite.
Well, yes, and I think that actually you will find advocates of human rights who will admit that the whole idea of human rights is a substitute for a religion which they believe to have failed and to no longer be necessary. And I think it's a rival. I'm not absolutely sure what the intellectual origins of human rights are, apart from the French Revolution, which doesn't seem to me to be a very good starting point. What is the origin of the idea that man has rights as such? In what makes them absolute and inalienable? I don't know. I believe in limited government. I think the use of the word rights until the French Revolution generally applied to that. The English Bill of Rights is a series of things which the king may not do. And the American Bill of Rights, which was a copy of it, is a series of things which Congress and the President may not do. That's the kind of right I want, really, actually, just a limit on government within which government is forced to operate. Limited government, limited punishment. These are things which are essential for a civilized society in which people can be free. Whereas rights are often group rights. They're often in contradiction to each other, and they simply provide power to elite courts, which have set ideas as to how society should be, to interpret those rights to mean what they always wanted to happen in the first place, which is what the US Supreme Court does, and increasingly what the European Court of Human Rights does, and what the growing and increasingly important European Court of Justice in Luxembourg does as well, on the basis of the second European Charter, the Fundamental Rights Charter, which is the European Union's own, which I think will eventually supersede the ECHR.
What's the big problem in your mind with the makeup of the EU, the direction of the EU?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the EU can do what it likes as long as my country doesn't belong to it. It may be, I don't happen to think that it is. I think supranational organizations are not a good idea. It may be suitable for the countries of Europe. It may even be that, particularly for the old Franco-German question, which couldn't be resolved by war after war after war, that some kind of forced marriage between those two countries, which is at the heart of the European Union, might work. I don't know. That's a matter for them. What I do know is that the whole point about England and Britain, which England became when it became the United Kingdom, the whole point about these islands in which we live is that their traditions are separate. They're religiously separate, they're legally separate, they're culturally separate, and we have many possessions in terms of, for instance, jury trial and the genuine presumption of innocence, not a theoretical but a real one, common law, and the idea of constitutional monarchy, which simply don't exist in any real sense on the European continent, and which the European continent's ideas would actually cancel out if we fully merge with them. And the truth is, the heart of the European project is this proposal for l'union de plus en plus étroite, which is generally translated as ever closer union, but actually more literally as ever narrower, or indeed ever tighter union. And in such an ever tighter union, there won't be room, I don't think, for jury trial, or the presumption of innocence, or the common law. They will have to give way to the civil code and to the long pre-trial detention and examining magistrates and all the other features of continental societies which make them so much less free than ours. And also, our Protestant tradition is not the same as their Roman Catholic tradition. It just isn't. Whichever you prefer is not here the point. The point is it has made a different kind of society. If you value the sort of society which Britain has become, then you can't be pleased about it being absorbed into and cancelled out by a very different society from outside.
So you don't see any role for Britain, for example, in shaping the EU. It's more likely to be swallowed up.
Well, I don't think any role in shaping is offered. I think the DNA, if you like, of the EU is already there. It will take the shape that it will take, whatever you do. And there is no. If you are part of that and you agree with it and you accept that, then maybe you can influence it in various directions. But if your own direction is wholly different, all you can do is struggle until you're squashed or leave. And it seems to me to be the civilized thing to do is to leave. I'm not a Eurosceptic, I'm a secessionist. I don't think there's any alternative. You must either give in completely and say, all right, we give up what we have and cease to be what we have been and vanish from the stage of history for good, or we leave. And it doesn't seem to me to be a very difficult choice.
In the book, The Abolition of Liberty, you make a statement about your own country, England. England is rapidly becoming a place where the good are afraid of the bad and the bad are not afraid of anything. You talk about the wicked needing to be disciplined and afraid, but this whole idea of personal wickedness is no longer au fait in most of Europe today.
No, it's been vacuumed out of the legal system. The legal system, essentially in the grip of social democratic and Fabian ideas, assumes that crime is a consequence of social deprivation, child abuse, or some other thing in which the person who commits the crime has no part. Well, that's obviously a complete divergence from the Christian view that we have our own responsibility to behave well or ill, and that when we behave badly, we should be punished for it. The old English prison commissioners actually had as their what would now be called their mission statement, the due punishment of responsible persons. The whole point being that you didn't fall into the hands of the prison commissioners unless, as a responsible adult with the ability to choose, you'd done something wrong knowingly, broken the law knowingly, and been caught at it and were being punished for it. The whole concept of punishment has to depend on people being responsible for their own actions. Now we don't punish. And all we actually do is warehouse. And this has terrific effects, because if you don't believe that your criminal justice system has a moral purpose, then what can you do with it? Everything you do has to be feeble. If you don't believe fundamentally what I'm doing here is based upon a belief that if I don't do it, things will be worse, then all you can do is manage. And that's what they do. They manage crime. And they mediate between the offender and the victim. And the only point at which they get really, really angry and punitive is when anybody tries to behave as if the old law still existed. So if an individual tries to enforce the old laws against theft, for instance, and physically attacks and punishes a burglar in his own home, it will be the individual who does the attacking and punishing who gets taken by the law, arrested, fingerprinted, thrown in a cell and put in jail for a long time. The burglar will probably be given community service. What the state really disapproves of is anybody breaching its monopoly. It'll punish you for that. And that's the thing on which it has an absolute punitive desire, but nothing else.
And in England over the last couple of years, we've read a number of cases of people, rightly or wrongly, claiming that they're being persecuted for a particular faith, their Christian faith. Do you not think that persecution might be too strong a word in those cases?
Persecution is too strong a word, and we know what persecution looks like. And it would be foolish to call it persecution.
What would you call it?
Well,
bias, political correctness gone mad?
And I certainly wouldn't say political correctness gone mad, because political correctness is a very sane project. It's very carefully measured and balanced to make the saying and the thinking of certain thoughts impossible. And it's one of the most effective censorship exercises ever launched, precisely because it isn't called censorship. And the fact that people make a joke out of it has been one of its great strengths. Oh, political correctness, ha, ha, ha. In the moment you fall into that, then you've had it. Because the moment you start going on about follically challenged people and treating it as if it was some kind of comic turn, you've failed to spot what's actually going on. Actually, sooner or later, you'll be saying follically challenged, because you won't dare say bald anymore. Because bit by bit it works on you. So no, the cunningness of the modern liberal elite is that it binds people in chains of marshmallow rather than in chains of iron. They're sticky, but they're soft. You can't get out of them, but you can't really make out that you're in the hands of Stalin or Hitler or the Gulag or the Gestapo, because it obviously isn't that. And so it's very hard to work up any animus against it or get people as worried about it as they should be. It's soft totalitarianism, nice totalitarianism. Totalitarianism was a smiley face badge on, and therefore much, much harder to fight. If it were persecution, I think people would react against it. But it's precisely because it's not persecution, it's a sort of trivial harassment and nuisance and gradual marginalization. It's almost impossible to combat. It's like hacking at a fog bag with a cutlass.
Chains of marshmallow is a picture that'll stay with me for a while. Just in the last few moments, Peter, I wonder if we can turn just to the subject of the church. You've written this: hell was abolished about the same time that abortion was legalised and the death penalty was done away with. You seem to regret that the church is no longer making any pronouncements about divine judgment. How does the church get the balance right? Talking about God's intolerance of sin and fallenness, and on the other hand, his loving desire to redeem humanity.
Don't know, really. It's not a thing I've ever thought about trying to advise them on. I think that all it really needs to do at the moment is to point to the consequences of what people have for many years thought of as kindness. If the kindness which we've shown, for instance, to willful criminals, had not been shown, would we have been kinder? In my view, we would. Because as I say, the wicked flourish as the green bay tree. And as the wicked flourish, the gentle and the kind and the weak suffer. And kindness doesn't always take the form of being soft. Kindness sometimes has to take the form of the steep and rugged pathway. And if they would just say that, it would be a start. But the idea that by giving way to things, you're showing compassion, that's what they could very easily cease to do without, I think, losing their ability to claim to be Christian.
You've said in one of your books that your grandfather was, I think, a Calvinist, a Baptist.
Well, Calvinist would be the technical term because he was a Baptist, so so that undoubtedly would be, but he would certainly call himself a Baptist.
Yeah. The thing you say, though, is that he had a scorn of the modern world. And I wonder whether you've inherited some of his gene, if you like, some of his distaste for modernisation, especially when it comes to traditionalism in the church versus modernisation.
Well, he wouldn't have had anything to do with that anyway, because he was being a Baptist and probably descended from one of Cromwell's Ironsides. He wouldn't have had much time for the Church of England and its papistical. He would have regarded the lowest Church of England service as being on the verge of the Vatican anyway. So that's not him. I think there's a strain in English history of which I remain very proud, of the cussed nonconformist nuisance who stands up in the village or wherever it is and says, no, I'm not putting up with this. I like to think I've inherited that from him.
But when it comes to the Church of England in particular, you've made some pretty bold statements about the fact that new methods are not as attractive to the mainstream population, nor are they as authoritative as the old.
Well, I can't tell about attraction. How do you go about getting a population completely untutored in the Christian religion to attend church services? I have no idea. But I tell you one thing, if you can get them to attend church services, do you not think they might be beautiful? Do you not think they might be full of poetry and great music and taking place in unvandalized, glorious medieval buildings, rather than baby taught prayers and Bibles in nursery English strips of poetry and beauty and buildings which were once beautiful crammed with stupid modern furniture and in the case of one English cathedral, fluorescent lights, TV monitors, and I think a work of alleged art by Tracy Emin. We don't need this stuff. We have these tremendous resources, and if people who are at all open to Christianity were exposed to the poetry of the authorized version of the Bible and the 1662 prayer book, then I think they would understand that this was something utterly different from the 21st century, utterly different from the spirit of the age. And it would seem to me that if you go to church, it's the spirit of the age you're trying to get away from. But what most of the churches have been offering, certainly since the 1960s, is the spirit of the age inside the church as well as out. And why would that attract anybody? I don't understand. I think actually the Church of England has not so much failed to attract as driven away an awful lot of its members by acts of what I regard as cruelty, of abolishing what was familiar and known. And Anglicans, being terribly polite and nice, have accepted this for a bit and then drifted away, sadly thinking, this isn't where I belong anymore.
If you were, and you're not, a church leader of a local congregation of parishioners, what would be the Christian tenets that you would most want to instill in them as they go out to face the wide secular world we live in today?
In so much as you have done it unto the least of one of these, ye have done it unto me, I think.
Very, very poignant. As we come to a close then, you've been described by one reviewer as writing elegant Jeremiads. Do you see yourself as a kind of modern day prophet screaming against the postmodern wilderness?
I'm a jobbing scribbler, doing what, as Dr. Johnson described, as scribbling on the backs of advertisements. I have no pretensions beyond that. That's all what I do. I don't see myself as anything other than what I am.
Peter, that's been wonderful speaking to you, and I just so much appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Well,
special guest today has been Peter Hitchens, award-winning journalist, broadcaster and author. You can find out a lot more about Peter's work, including his books, on our website. I'm Fletcher. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.